She had perfected the art of stillness. Her face was a sculpture, composed, elegant, unreadable, but underneath the table, her fingers were tearing the edge of a paper napkin into tiny white pieces, and she didn't even know she was doing it. That was the moment Marcus realized everything she'd said in the last 20 minutes was a lie. Not a cruel lie. Not the kind that destroys. The kind that people tell when they are so desperate to appear okay that they have forgotten what okay even feels like. The kind that comes from a woman who has been holding herself together for so long that the holding has become more exhausting than the breaking ever could have been. He saw it in the way she sat. Spine perfectly straight, chin slightly lifted, blue dress pressed and deliberate, like armor chosen with care that morning. She wanted to look like a woman who had moved on. She wanted to look like someone the past hadn't touched, but her hands, those restless, betraying hands, were confessing everything her voice refused to say. Her name was Serena Voss, and this was the day her silence finally cost her everything, and then, in the most unexpected way, gave it all back. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to survive something that nearly broke you, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it today, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our family is everywhere. Serena had grown up learning that strength was the only currency worth earning. Her mother, a woman named Delphine, had raised her alone in a small apartment above a dry cleaning shop in a mid-sized city where everybody knew your name, but nobody really knew your story. Delphine worked doubles, skipped meals, and never once let Serena see her cry. Not when the pipes burst in January, not when the landlord raised the rent without warning, not when the man Serena had called dad for 7 years simply stopped coming home one Tuesday like it was nothing, like they were nothing. Delphine would smooth her uniform, tie her hair back, and say the same thing every morning. Stand straight, don't let them see you wobble. Serena had taken that lesson and built her entire life around it. She was the girl in school who volunteered to present first because she refused to let anyone see her hands shake. She was the woman in the office who stayed late, not just because she cared about the work, but because leaving on time felt like weakness, like surrender. She was the kind of person people described as put together, professional, impressive, and not one of them, not a single soul, had ever thought to ask what it cost her. She had married a man named Theodore Crane when she was 29. He was charming in the particular way that only reveals itself as dangerous after the contract is signed. He wasn't violent, not with his hands. He was the other kind, the kind that chips away. The kind that says you're too sensitive when you cry, you're overreacting when you're afraid, nobody else would put up with you when you try to leave. He said these things so consistently, so calmly, so reasonably, that after 4 years, Serena had begun to believe every word. She stopped calling friends, she stopped laughing at things she used to find funny, she stopped wearing the blue dress she loved because Theodore had once said it made her look like she was trying too hard. She left him on a Wednesday, not dramatically, not with shouting or revelation or lightning from the sky. She just woke up one morning, looked at her own face in the bathroom mirror for a very long time, and thought, I don't know who this is anymore. She packed 2 bags while Theodore was at work. She drove to a budget motel on the edge of the city. She sat on the edge of the bed in room 114 and stared at the wall for 3 hours. And then she ordered a pizza she barely ate, and that was that. 4 years of her life ended with cold pizza and a water-stained ceiling and the most terrifying, electric, nauseating feeling she had ever experienced. Something that took her weeks to identify as freedom. That had been 14 months ago. The rebuilding was not cinematic. It did not come with a montage of empowering music and sunrise runs and new haircuts. It came with panic attacks in grocery store parking lots. It came with calling her mother at 2 in the morning just to hear a voice. It came with therapy appointments she almost canceled every single week and then attended anyway, fingers white-knuckled on her steering wheel in the parking lot, reminding herself she had driven all the way here, she was already here, she just had to walk through the door. It came with learning, slowly and painfully, that asking for help was not weakness. But 14 months was not enough time to fully believe that. Not yet. Not all the way. She had started a new job 4 months ago at a mid-sized architecture firm called Callaway and Webb. The work was good. She was talented. She had always been talented, even when Theodore had spent years suggesting otherwise. Her boss, a steady and no-nonsense woman named Priya, had noticed her work ethic immediately. Her colleagues were kind. She had even made something approaching a friendship with a woman down the hall named Zoe, who brought homemade food to the office on Fridays and laughed too loudly and never seemed to notice or care what anyone thought of that. Zoe was everything Serena had forgotten people could be: uncalculated, generous, embarrassingly sincere. And then there was Marcus. Marcus Webb was the junior partner at Callaway and Webb, which meant he was technically her superior, though he never behaved like it. He was 34, quietly observant in a way that Serena had initially found unnerving. She was used to men who performed their confidence loudly, who filled rooms with themselves and expected applause. Marcus did not do that. He listened in meetings instead of waiting to speak. He remembered small things people mentioned in passing. He brought the right kind of coffee to the right people, without being asked. He was the kind of man that Serena, in her current state of carefully maintained emotional distance, had decided was simply too straightforward to be trusted, because her nervous system no longer knew how to process kindness without searching it for traps. She had been doing just fine. She had been maintaining the distance. She had been standing straight, not wobbling, exactly as she'd been taught, and then the Hargrove project happened. The Hargrove project was a large commercial renovation, a historic building downtown being converted into a mixed-use space, and it was by far the most complex project Serena had worked on since joining the firm. She had thrown herself into it completely, arriving early, staying late, filling notebooks with calculations and sketches and contingency plans. She told herself it was ambition. She knew, if she was being honest, that it was also the most effective way she had found to avoid the apartment that still felt too quiet, to avoid the thoughts that gathered at the edges of a mind with too much idle time. 2 weeks before the presentation to the Hargrove clients, a critical error was discovered in the structural load calculations for the third-floor renovation. It was an honest mistake, a misreading of an updated specification document. But it was Serena's mistake on Serena's section of the plan, and when she found it at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening, alone in the office with the city darkening outside the windows, she felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She thought of Theodore saying, "I knew you'd find a way to mess this up." She thought of Delphine saying, "Stand straight, don't let them see you wobble." She started fixing it. Alone. She didn't call anyone. She didn't leave notes or send emails. She just put her head down and began recalculating, because the idea of someone seeing the mistake before she had corrected it was more unbearable than anything else she could imagine. She worked until midnight. She came in at 6 the next morning. She didn't eat. She didn't mention it to anyone. By Thursday morning, she had a revised plan, clean and correct, and if anything, stronger than the original. She walked into Marcus's office and placed it on his desk without a word. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at it again. Then he said quietly that he'd noticed the original issue on Tuesday evening and had been concerned when he couldn't reach her. He said the revised plan was excellent, better than excellent. He asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. She said it in the voice she'd spent years perfecting. Smooth, level, a closed door with a pleasant face painted on it. She said it like a woman who meant it. But she was holding a pen, and without realizing it, she was clicking it. Open, closed, open, closed, open, closed. A nervous rhythm she had no idea she was producing. Marcus looked at the pen. Then he looked at her face, and he said nothing. But she saw, in the way his expression shifted, that he understood something she had not said and had not meant to communicate. She left his office quickly, mortified in a way she couldn't fully explain. That was how they ended up at the coffee shop 3 days later. He had asked if she wanted to get coffee. Not in a loaded way, not with any agenda she could detect, just the simple and apparently genuine question of whether she had 20 minutes and a willingness to leave the building. She had almost said no. She had run her usual calculus, the one where she assessed the risk of any social interaction and usually found reasons to decline. But Zoe had been watching from down the hall with an expression that was equal parts encouragement and threat, and so Serena had said yes. They walked 2 blocks to a cafe she'd never been to. It was bright and modern, warm wood tables and pendant lights, and the comfortable murmur of other people's lives in the background. They ordered, they sat, and Marcus, instead of launching into the kind of professional small talk she had prepared for, simply asked her how she was doing. Not how are you the way people say it as a passing formality. How she was doing, the present, continuous, the ongoing state of her. Something about the directness of it caught her completely off guard. She began talking. She said she was great. She said the Hargrove project was exciting. She loved a challenge. She felt really good about where things were heading. She said she was settling in nicely to the new role, and the team was wonderful, and she was genuinely really well, all things considered. She said this fluently and convincingly and with excellent eye contact. She was proud of how convincing it sounded. She had practiced this version of herself for a long time, but her hands had taken the paper napkin from beneath her coffee cup and begun methodically, unconsciously, tearing it into smaller and smaller pieces. She didn't notice. She was too focused on her voice, her face, her performance of okayness. She was so focused on what she was showing that she'd lost track of what she was doing. Marcus didn't interrupt her. He let her finish. And then he glanced, very gently, at the pile of shredded napkin on the table between them. Serena looked down. The silence that followed was one of the most honest moments she had experienced in years. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was something she absolutely refused to do in a coffee shop in front of a colleague. The laugh came out strange and short, and she pressed her lips together afterward and stared at the destroyed napkin and felt, with a clarity that was almost physical, the exhaustion of the performance, the weight of it. The years and years of standing straight, of not wobbling, of perfecting the closed door with the pleasant face. She felt it all at once, the way you sometimes feel a bruise only after you've accidentally pressed it. Marcus said softly that he wasn't asking because it was any of his business. He wasn't asking to be intrusive or to fix anything. He was asking because he had seen her work alone until midnight on something that was difficult and then arrive the next morning like nothing had happened. And he thought that was one of the most impressive and also one of the loneliest things he had seen in a long time. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "It's been a hard year." 3 words, the understatement of her life. But they came out without the pleasant face painted on them, and the difference was startling, to her more than to anyone. What followed was not a dramatic outpouring. She did not tell him about Theodore or the motel or the panic attacks in parking lots. She was not ready for that, and she knew she was not ready for that, and she did not push herself. What she did was allow, for the first time in as long as she could remember, the possibility that someone on the other side of a conversation might be trustworthy. She talked about the job, about the pressure she put on herself, about the way she found it difficult to ask for help when she needed it, and the way she sometimes confused self-sufficiency with self-destruction. She said it lightly, carefully, with irony in her voice, like she was discussing someone she'd read about in an interesting article, but she said it, out loud, to another person. Marcus listened without fixing. He did not offer solutions or silver linings or advice she hadn't asked for. He ordered them both a second cup of coffee when their first ones were finished. He told her something that surprised her, that he had gone through something difficult several years ago, a professional failure that had cost him enormously, and that the most useful thing anyone had done for him during that time was sit with him and not try to make it smaller. He said, "It's allowed to be hard. It doesn't have to mean you're not strong." She heard that and felt something shift in her chest, small and significant at once. She went home that evening and sat in her apartment, which felt slightly less too quiet than usual. She called her mother. She told Delphine she'd had a decent day. Delphine asked what decent meant, and for once, Serena laughed and said, "I'll explain later." Actually decent, Mom, I promise. She did not fall apart. She did not have a revelation. Life does not work in revelations, she had learned. It works in increments, in tiny adjustments, in the accumulation of small choices made in the direction of something better. But she noticed that night that she felt lighter, not fixed, not resolved, not suddenly whole in the way that stories sometimes pretend is possible. Just lighter. The way you feel after putting down something heavy you didn't realize you were carrying, even if only for an hour. She thought about her hands. She had always been ashamed of what they gave away. The clicking pens, the torn napkins, the white knuckles on steering wheels. She had always seen them as a betrayal, a failure of the composure she worked so hard to maintain. But sitting in her quiet apartment, turning the thought over, she began to see it differently. Her hands had been honest when the rest of her wouldn't allow it. Her hands had been reaching out, in their wordless way, for exactly what she needed. They were not a betrayal. They were a signal. They were the part of her that still believed someone might see and care and not use it against her. They were the part of her that hadn't given up. Months later, when Serena thought about that afternoon, and she thought about it often, not because of Marcus, though they had built something careful and real over time, but because of what it had meant for her. She always came back to the napkin, the small white pile of torn paper that had said what she couldn't. She kept it in a strange way she never fully explained to herself, not the napkin, but the memory of it, the memory of being caught in her own honesty. The memory of the precise moment when being seen had not destroyed her. She stopped trying so hard to look unbreakable, not immediately, not completely. The habit of a lifetime does not vanish in an afternoon. But she started noticing when she was performing and choosing, sometimes, not to. She started saying, "This is hard," instead of "I'm fine," first to her therapist, then to Zoe, then in time to other people she trusted. She started wearing the blue dress again. She still stood straight. She still had her mother's posture, her mother's discipline, her mother's remarkable, impossible stubbornness. But she started to understand that strength and softness were not opposites, that you could stand straight and still let someone see you wobble. That the bravest thing she had ever done was not keeping it together. It was falling apart, quietly, over a cup of coffee, in front of someone who was kind enough to let her. Her hands had known it before the rest of her did. She was grateful for them, in the end. Grateful for the torn napkin and the clicking pen and every unconscious confession her body had made when her voice had failed her. They had told the truth she wasn't ready to tell. They had asked for what she needed when she couldn't ask herself. They had kept her human all those years she spent trying to be stone. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or of a version of yourself you've been working hard to hold together, please give this video a like, leave a comment below, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Your engagement means more than you know. It's how stories like this find the people who need them most. Before this story ends, we have one small request. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever tried to look strong when you were falling apart? What helped you? Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. She still went to that same cafe sometimes. She would sit at the same warm wooden table, order the same coffee, and watch the door swing open and closed as strangers moved through their days, each one carrying something, each one with their own hands, that sometimes knew the truth before the rest of them did. She wasn't the woman who had torn that napkin anymore, or rather, she was that woman, fully and without apology, but she had stopped being ashamed of her. She was Serena Voss. She had survived 4 years of quiet erosion. She had rebuilt herself in a budget motel room with cold pizza and a water-stained ceiling. She had worked until midnight on her worst nights and arrived the next morning with her spine straight and her work impeccable. She had cried in parking lots and called her mother and sat on her therapist's couch with shaking hands and come back the following week anyway. She had tried to look strong, but her hands had given her away, and that, in the end, had saved her.